Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host, Jo Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's podcast episode. Today, the topic is using intuition in coaching. And we are going to be covering what intuition is, how to access it, when to use it, give you some tips around how you might introduce it. And also we're going to explore how we can support our coaching clients to be able to tap into their intuition. And the reason that we're covering this as a topic is that intuition is really a superpower in coaching. So being able to build your relationship with your own intuition and know how to use it will really help to develop your coaching skills.
Absolutely. And I think when you're learning and developing as a coach, there's so much to take in that you can forget sometimes that your intuition is also there to be tapped into. I know it took me, probably a couple of years to really start to recognize my intuition as that super skill in coaching and to really learn to listen to it and, converse with it to find out what it was trying to guide me to do. And today my coaching is quite highly intuitively led. It's something I lean on and use a lot in my client work. And I think intuition, maybe we start by defining what it is. But for me, intuition is a combination of actually all of my years of experience, skills, and strengths that exists in my unconscious mind that I tap into without even thinking about it, coupled with those senses, so you're processing all of the time, taking in what you see and what you hear and what you feel. And intuition, I think, is the magic that brings all of those things together to present you with new information. How would you describe it?
Yeah, exactly in that way. And in some ways, I'd almost describe it as my inner super coach, that it's not rational. So it's not overthought. It's that often people will describe it as your gut. That's not how everybody experiences it. For me, it's that place when I am in my kind of peripheral vision. I'm listening to what my coachee is saying, but I'm noticing that perhaps they're looping, or that there's repetition in what they're saying, and there's something else actually at play here. That's when I kind of start to zone into my intuition to kind of explore, how can I best be in service of my client, and almost move out of the sort of minutiae of the session and just think about what else is happening here that I need to be aware of or bring our awareness to.
Yeah, really interesting. You mentioned the gut instinct thing there, because I don't experience my intuition in my gut. I experience it very much in my head, which is, and I do feel as well. Maybe I'll come on to that. But it comes from a different direction in my head to my normal thoughts. So I think we all have an internal voice. And, my internal voice will be musing around, oh, what shall I have for lunch? And not during a coaching session, of course, but, those musings. But when it's my intuitive voice, it comes from a different place in my head. And that's when I know that it's my intuition and not perhaps my own stuff getting mixed up with my intuition. Where do you experience your intuition?
I was just thinking about that. I definitely get a sense of it kind of coming in at speed rather than it being like a slow grow. For me, my first reaction, my intuition was telling me in my heart, that space. But then that developed into thinking, actually, I think it is, it's heart and head at the same time. So whereas normally maybe you would lead with feeling and be really tuning into what you feel and everything else is tuned out, or maybe you're overthinking so everything else is tuned out. It's the intersection of the two for me.
Yeah, I think there's that piece around feeling as well, because I have intuitive thoughts. I also have, I guess, intuitive feelings. And we've talked a bit about this before. And I think transference and things like that, it comes from intuition, in that you start to sense and pick up emotions that don't belong to you. So you might be sensing anxiety, or you might be sensing confusion, and that isn't yours, like you're not confused and you're not anxious. And so where is that coming from? And I do think that is a part of the intuition at play as well.
So when we think about, how do we access it? I think you and I have talked before about intuition relies on self-trust and allowing yourself to hear that inner voice, not the inner critic, but the inner voice, two separate things. And being able to tune out other things. So you're kind of zoning out. It's a very quiet place, I think, when you connect with your intuition. So you purely hear that internal voice. What about you? What would you say about how you access it?
I think what you said around self-trust is really important. So my intuition went off the scale when I did some work on my own self-trust. And I think self-trust for me is always linked to, well, all of your experiences with your own emotional well-being and the extent to which you feel confident to trust yourself and confident to take risks and confident to stand out from the crowd. And I did some of this work on my own self-trust for pure kind of self-development. But after I did, my intuition started coming much more loudly. So I think the process of developing as a coach, I think in itself, the training in coaching skills helps you to reconnect with your inner coach, because I think that's the first thing, isn't it? Is activating that inner coach that helps to guide you through your decision making and guide you, based on your values and the things that are important to you. So there's that. And I think as you go through your coaching training and invest in your development, you start to process all the different life events and emotions that have happened. And I think it almost like, I see it as sweeping out the room, like cleaning up, dusting out the cobwebs, that allows you to hear and tap into your intuition in a much more frequent fashion.
Yeah. And I think accessing it and then articulating it are two different skills. So once you've actually noticed, how do I tune into my intuition? What is it telling me? Then you've got to work out in the context of a coaching conversation, how and when will you articulate it? And what we would say is intuition is a really important skill, but you can't just rely on intuition. And that's one of the reasons why you might have great conversations at the moment, get great feedback, but there will be situations that arise that perhaps you don't feel equipped to deal with. And so having coaching training enables you to have both parts, intuition, but also, the theories, the tools, the models, the kind of conscious, maybe, rational things, and then we've got the intuition. And as you develop as a coach, it's about how you learn how to bring those two resources together.
Absolutely. And I think it's also being able to distinguish between when is it intuition and when is it your own stuff coming yes. into the conversation. And that does happen in coaching conversations. If you're working with a client and they've had a similar experience to you and that's what they're working on, it may feel like intuition guiding you to ask certain questions with a client, but it might be that you're leading the client based on your own life experiences. And, as you gain more experience in coaching, you can start to tell the difference between the two, because one will be in service of your client. The other may not be in service of your client and might be more coming from a place of ego. Even if it's coming there with good intention, it may not be the most appropriate path to take with your client at that time.
Yeah. And journaling can help people to access their intuition. If it's something that you find difficult to listen into or to notice, and you're thinking, this all sounds really good and I want to be able to tap into my intuition, how do I get started? What's the practical thing to do? I think finding a quiet space, getting into the practice of journaling, noticing what comes up in your journaling, because you'll probably find that there's new information there for you, and that will start to build your relationship with your intuition.
And I think when we say journaling, that can be that you pose a question almost to your intuition. So let's say that you are trying to make a decision and you're feeling confused. You might start your journaling with, what is this confusion I'm experiencing? And just let yourself write about what it is, and that will give you kind of different insights. We often joke, don't we, that our most intuitive hits come just as we're about to drift off to sleep. And then
that's definitely when mine come, or out on a walk. So I think the motion aspect really helps me. And I read something this week that talked about walking meditation, and I thought, because meditation isn't something that is kind of attractive to me to stay in one place, because I enjoy being busy and but actually out walking on my own is when things will often drop in. Or you and I think, pretty much designed a program on a walk once, and we said, wow, if we'd have been sat at a table, we'd have been there all day and it would have felt hard.
Yes.
It just fell out of us when we were walking and talking.
I remember going for a run one day, and I'd been working on some coaching techniques. And as I was running, all these titles for these different coaching techniques were like coming into my mind. I'm like, no, not now, because I don't have a pen or a notebook to be able to capture. And I think the thing with that sort of level of intuitive hits is to not feel the need to over edit the intuition, because you can have your intuition and then your conscious mind can kick in and you start questioning, like, oh, is that the right thing? Is that not the right thing? Like, should I do that? Should I not do that? And so when you're outside of a coaching space, I think your critic, you've got your intuition, and then you've got your critic that can creep in and want to kind of edit your intuition. And I think the beauty actually in coaching is that you don't really have time for that conscious critic to kind of come in and question too much about the intuition, because the pace of a coaching conversation can move so fast that actually, if you choose not to act on your intuition, the moment would have passed anyway. And so how I find myself using it in a coaching conversation now is often presenting things as an observation. So, do you know what? Just as you said that then, I had a really strong sense of something, is that relevant to this conversation? Is it not relevant? Like, how are you experiencing that? And sometimes it'll be bang on and the client will be like, well, it's really interesting you say that because, or they'll say, no, not so much. And you just have to be detached from the intuition to be able to let it go, because if it's not relevant to the client, you just move on.
Yeah. Now you can also, the phrase I use a lot is, can I share something with you? Or I'm noticing that. So it's a combination of questions and statements. And obviously it depends on what you've contracted for in terms of the ways of working in the relationship that you have as coach and coachee. And talking about how people often discount their intuition. If you think about schooling, workplaces, and if you imagine, in a project meeting or a board meeting, somebody says, it's all well and good, but my intuition is telling me, how, as you're listening, how would that kind of a statement be responded to in your organization or your workplace? Is it welcome? And I think one of the things that tells us is that coaching is actually a very creative profession. There is room for you to tap into that. And you were talking about, that really dancing in the moment of how quickly you have to make those decisions and notice your intuition and make that decision about whether to share it or not. And that depends on if you think it is useful for the client. And I think intuition also comes up as we notice patterns in coaching conversations. I think that's certainly, we're kind of pattern hunters in a way. And, for those people that are visual, they might even be able to see, the conversation, let's say, in front of them. So think about that. If you are listening and thinking about training to be a coach, do you want to lean into the creative part of you more? If you do, you're probably going to get great joy from coaching, even though when I did my original Wheel of Life, creativity just happened to be strangely something I added onto it. And I scored it like 2 out of 10, I think. And I didn't consider myself to be creative because I was thinking about the traditional forms of being creative, like painting and so on. And I wasn't doing anything like that. But then when I think about how I'm creative in a literary sense, then I'm like, oh, yes, definitely. Or in my thinking, yes, I could really identify with that.
Yeah. And of course, we're talking here about people who maybe have a strong intuition, anyway. And often those people are, as well as being highly intuitive, they're highly empathic, so empaths, we know, are kind of drawn to these sorts of professions because of a desire to kind of help and support people. But there are a lot of people who come to coaching who don't feel they have a natural kind of intuition or empath tendency. And that's okay as well, because everybody who enters into this coaching space all brings skills and strengths, and all of the skills and qualities can be grown and nurtured and developed. So even if you're thinking, gosh, do you need intuition for coaching? Because I'm not sure I'm very good at that. I don't feel like I'm a very intuitive person. Well, that's okay, because your intuition will become honed and grown as you move through the program and develop. It doesn't mean you'll become necessarily the most intuitive coach, but you will learn to tap into and draw on your intuition in the moments that it's necessary, as well as those people who are highly intuitive and have empaths. They'll have a different growth area to need to tap into, and that might be about putting boundaries around, or learning when intuition actually isn't the way forward and they need to go back and rely on a tool or a technique. So there's absolutely space for everybody in that coaching profession.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about using intuition in coaching, we also need to talk about how we can encourage our clients to tap into their own intuition as part of them achieving their goals in the way that they want to. So as a coach, I'm always thinking about, what's my client thinking? Do I understand that? Do I understand their model of the world? What's my client feeling now? What do they want to be feeling? What's the gap between that? And I'm thinking about, what are the behaviors that are going to help them to achieve that goal? And what are the behaviors that they're kind of displaying now, and are they aware of it? Or, what is the work around those things? What are the gaps? And intuition, I think, falls into that feeling category. So I might ask my client, we might be having a discussion, and I might ask them, what is your intuition telling you right now? And I'll often drop something like that in to change the pace or the direction, or just to jar a little bit with maybe the pattern that we've got into in our conversation. And it's not to say, right, we'll do that then. That's what your intuition says. So crack on. It's not that. It's more information, and we can help our clients to understand, what is the relationship between their thoughts and their feelings? What is their relationship? How do they feel about their intuition? How do they feel about the level of self-trust that they have? And how will developing those things help them to achieve their goal?
Yeah, it's about reconnecting with self, isn't it? And sometimes when you're lost in confusion, or you feel stuck and you've been overthinking something for such a long time, that simple question of, what does your intuition tells you, can reconnect you to yourself. And it also gives you a space to explore it free from judgment, because sometimes our intuition might sound crazy. It might sound like, I don't think I should be having those thoughts. But it's a space to be able to put out your intuitive thoughts and then have time and energy to work through them.
So many people, I think, deny that inner voice. Like, we have so many emails that we receive from people saying, I've been thinking about coaching for ages, or I've been watching you for ages, or I've been drawn to the two of you for ages, and then something finally reaches out. So I think one of the things with intuition is it often grows. And have a think to yourself around, when my intuition grows, like what do I tend to do? What tends to happen? Do I tend to respond to it, or does it tend to build up and then come out in a way that perhaps I wouldn't want it to? So the earlier I think you can tap into and listen to your intuition on different topics, the more useful and productive it will be for you. So perhaps over the next week, make the decision that you are going to start to tap into your intuition a bit more. Maybe write down each day what messages has your intuition been sharing with you, and then look at that at the end of the week and think about, okay, so now that I'm aware of this, are there patterns in my intuition? Is there anything I want to do differently?
Yeah. And if listening to this has inspired you to think about coming and training as a coach as part of kind of honing your intuition, and now you feel convinced that intuition has a place in coaching, come and take a look at our quiz at mycoachingcourse.com, which will help you to decide which coaching course is right for you. And of course, you can join us inside the coaching crowd.